Okay, so where's the share?
Down the bottom.
No, I've got a chat, a raised hand, and a Q&A.
Okay, there was issues with getting to become a panelist. We're having a few technical issues with Tracy. So I might just pause our recording while we sort through those.
Yeah, generally one of the biggest stresses that they have is habitat loss. So the further down the mountain you go, the more exudative dermatitis we find in animals, because they're in the brush-tailed possums, because there's more and more habitat loss the further down you go. They will make do with houses, sheds, cubby houses, had them in granny flats. Anywhere they can find somewhere to sleep, they will. Their natural habitat is a tree hollow. However, it takes 100 years for a tree to form a hollow and about 20 minutes to cut it down. So they're losing their homes and they're moving to ours. They're adaptable, and that's great, but that does cause stress for people. And we get quite a few hit by cars. The brush tails, not the ringtails. The ringtails tend to stay up in the canopy and don't come down to ground. They'll run along the power lines to move around, but brush tails will come to ground and can run out quite quickly in front of your car. Next slide. So the babies, because everyone loves baby photos. On the left, we've got two baby brush-tailed possums. The middle is a baby brush-tailed possum, and the one on the right is a baby ring-tailed possum. So we have, when they come into care as orphans, because mum's been hit by a car, or that's the usual reason, or rat bait, a lot of mothers will die from rat bait as well. We have them on special formula marsupial milk. We have to monitor weight to make sure that they're developing as they would if they were with mum. They have a diet of native flora, which is their natural native diet, rather than try to feed them on human food. We try as much as possible to dehumanize them. We don't want to raise possums and then have them released and have them think that humans are a safe place to go, because not all humans are particularly nice. And we have a soft release program where we put them into an aviary in bushland, and they stay in there for 2 weeks, just before maturity. And that way they get used to the sounds and the smells and everything of that area. Then we open the hatch and they can come and go from that aviary until they've found themselves a life out in the bushland. Next slide. We get a lot of calls where people don't know the difference between a ringtail and brushtail. So you can't actually tell from that photo, but the ringtail is about half the size of a brushtail. The biggest tellers to be able to tell the difference between them is the ringtail has quite short little ears, rounded ears, and they will have very short fur on the tail, usually with a white tip on the end. Brushtail has much larger ears, and I think it's got more of a kangaroo type face, and they have what looks like a toilet brush kind of a tail on them. So they are very different. Once you get used to them, they're very easy to spot the difference. But we get a lot of calls out for baby brushtails. And when we get out there, they're adult ringtails. So it's important to know the species. It will help us know what to bring with us when we come. Next slide. So the birds, we get a lot of birds in the mountains, and if you group the birds together, they probably take up about 70% of our call outs for wires. So the biggest issue we have with birds is for the rescues for these, they can be at height, which is always a challenge. We have birds that have all different types of diets. So we've got insectivores, carnivores, nectivores, granivores. We need to accommodate all of those different diets, and a lot of our bird carriers can have multiple birds from different diet groups all at the same time. Now, they are efficient for flight as well. And that means that they have evolved to not carry any extra weight in order to maintain flight. That means they don't carry extra fluid. If they get into trouble, they get stressed, anything happens to them, there will be fluid loss, which can mean significant damage to the bird itself. So that's the first thing we're going to look at and probably try and treat with a bird that's been injured. So for that side, we've got a tawny frogmouth up in the top left. Baby rainbow lorikeet is next to that. And they're so ugly, they're cute, baby corellas. Next slide. So the types of rescues we get for birds is head injury. We get a lot of those, either hit by cars because they're flying too close when they come in front of the cars, or they're flying into windows, doors, everything else. We can get wing damage when they're up in a tree, particularly on really, really windy days. Some of the birds, particularly the tawny frogmouth and the raptors, get caught in barbed wire. So the raptors come down, they're trying to get a mouse, they're targeted on their prey, they don't see the barbed wire, they're coming in low, they come in flat and hit the barbed wire, and then will spin and get tangled in the barbed wire. The interesting thing about barbed wire is a lot of the rescues that I go to, and I'll talk about flying foxes later, but even the tawnies that I've pulled out of barbed wire, the residents, when I get there, tell me they didn't even realize they had barbed wire in that back paddock. So a lot of people have barbed wire that's just been there forever. They don't particularly think they need barbed wire. If you have barbed wire, have a look around, take it down if you don't need it. We see too many possums get caught in it, tawnies get caught in it, the raptors get caught in it, and the flying foxes get caught in it. So a common disease for birds is the parrot family. They have the beak and feather disease. So that's the two photos on this page. That's a sulfur-crested cockatoo, much maligned bird, but I think they're majestic in flight. And so it's quite depressing to see a sulfur-crested with beak and feather disease, because it kind of takes away their dignity that that animal just inherently has. And the other one is a crimson rosella, I think it is. Anything from the parrot family can get beak and feather. Now, the problem with beak and feather is you're talking about flock animals. So they're hanging out together. It's highly contagious. It's incurable. And so you do not want to get it into the flock. If you see any bird from a parrot family that looks like it's losing its feathers like this, the beak can get a little bit gnarly. Call wires immediately. If you can grab it, grab it. The easiest way to get a bird is to try and put food on the ground, get it to come to a ground, and then throw a sheet over it. As it's trying to work out how to get out of the sheet, you can wrap it and take it to a vet, because it absolutely needs to be euthanized. Not only will it die painfully and slowly itself, it will transmit it to everyone else in the flock. Okay, and we do get orphans as well. The critical thing I'll ask about orphans is a lot of people, they find baby birds on the ground, and so they take them home. They're walking along a bush track and they find orphans and they take them home. The problem is mum and dad are probably around, and unless you can tell us exactly where they came from, we're going to have trouble finding the nest. So have a look around. If you find a baby on the ground, have a look around. Can you get it back into the nest? Because baby birds are going to do so much better if we can get them back with mum and dad. Or take a note of exactly where you are. Yeah, thanks. Okay. So reptiles, we do get a lot of different types of reptiles in the Blue Mountains. This is a bearded dragon that I picked up in Winmalee. The poor little guy had something like 87 ticks on him, I think it was. Now, they are fast. We get a lot of different species of them, and they're cold-blooded. So with the cold-blooded, it may be they go into like a torpor. So it may be that they're not actually injured or dead. It could just be cold-blooded and saving its energy. If you've got any issues, call wires. Next slide. It's probably my favorite reptile is the little blue tongue. And probably the number one type of reptile we get calls for, usually dog attacks. There's probably one a week where a dog gets its teeth into the blue tongue. They are pretty resilient, but we need to get antibiotics into them, and we need to have a look at the wound. We get a few hit by cars, and we do get ticks on the reptiles. And you can get lots of ticks because they're crawling through grass and scrub. And various reptiles will also get types of fungal disease that we will need to treat with medication. Next slide. Flying foxes. So I love these guys. So they've been listed to be a threatened species. They are impacted significantly by climate change. As I talked about with the birds, they are efficient for flight. So they do not carry any extra fluid on them because it would increase their weight when they're trying to fly. So the issue is that once the temperature gets over 42 degrees for more than 2 days consecutively, these guys suffer badly because they will have severe fluid loss. They start to get kidney damage and they will drop like flies. So not last year, but the year before in Emu Plains, which is the main camp for Blue Mountains, we lost something like 3,000 in one day. They just don't cope. So climate change and global warming is going to significantly impact these animals. Now, everybody's terrified of bats. We do have the Australian bat lyssavirus. I will tell you that less than 1% of bats have ABLV. The issue is you don't know what the 1% is. So we ask people not to interact with the bats. Don't touch them. Don't try and rescue them. If you find an injured bat, if you find a bat on the ground, if you find a bat wrapped in barbed wire, if it's caught in netting at your house, call Wires immediately. We'll send out a vaccinated bat rescuer for that. They do live in colonies, large groups, which, you know, if you live next door is probably quite noisy, but they are absolutely majestic creatures in flight. And anyone interested can go down to the rowing club in Penrith, Nepean, and you can watch them come out on dusk from the main camp down there. Now, the reason why these animals are absolutely critical, not just because they're cute and because they're little characters, is they are the most prolific spreader of native seed. So particularly the eucalypt. And given the Blue Mountains gets its name from the blue gum, these are critical little creatures for us. Without the flying fox, there would be no koalas. There would be lots of animals within Australia. So we really need to make sure that these guys are okay and that they continue to survive with climate change impacts that are coming. Next slide. So the types of rescues we do for these guys. Now, the main camps in Emu Plains, we have had for the last few years a pop-up camp at certain times of the year in Hazelbrook, but they will fly up to 100 kilometres a night for food. So the most common thing we get is netting. So on the left, you've got the poor little guy there in the plum tree. Now, there is animal-friendly netting you can get. If you want to keep animals out of your fruit trees, get animal-friendly netting. If you can get a finger through, then an animal can get through. It's not safe. You can see there on that little guy that the netting is wrapped around part of his wing there at the elbow part. That is very abrasive and can cause significant damage, and sometimes the animal needs to be euthanized. I have had them where the netting has actually cut toes off them because they struggle and freak out and try to get out of the netting. So as I said earlier, all of the animals here survived and were healed and were returned. So the one on the right is a little one. It was fine. It was just wrapped in netting. We cut it as much as we could out of the netting and left the netting on it because it was thrashing and screaming too much. So the vet at North Richmond was able to calm it down and get the netting off. So we get netting, we get barbed wire, again, like the tawnies and the raptors. They come in low and flat, hit the barbed wire that they don't see, and then spin. And so then when you get out there, it's like a Rubik's Cube trying to untangle it from barbed wire. It will have barbs caught in various parts of its body, often tears in the wings, which the wings are actually pretty resilient. So long as you don't get the trailing part, the rest of it can heal. But the bat's usually screaming. Sometimes it's barbed wire on the top of fences. So you're trying to do that up a ladder. It's not easy. So if you've got barbed wire and you don't need it, can you remove it? Power lines are also common. Now, lots of our wildlife use power lines as highways, and that's fine. Ringtails particularly, and I have seen brushtails do it. The problem with the flying foxes is they land on the lines and then they spread their wings out. And once they're touching two wires, they get electrocuted. And it's usually mothers with babies who have gone off for a bit of quiet away from the colony. And the resting position for flying foxes for the claws is closed. So they die on the barbed wire and their claws are wrapped around it, and we have to call Endeavour Energy, who will come out and remove them from the line so that we can check for a pup. Okay, so we do get, if you do see a flying fox hanging from power lines, call Wires immediately. Will come out because we need to do a pup check on them to make sure that the pup doesn't die of starvation while mum's up there on the line. So we do get some orphans either through the power line option, or we have significant events, particularly with climate change and when there's stress placed on a colony, where you can have a pup abandonment event where you'll have hundreds of babies abandoned at one time. So we have to go down and try and spread those out to carers all over the place to keep those babies going, because, as I said, they are threatened. Next slide. The babies. So the babies are very, very cute, as are all babies. The thing with these guys is, if you have a look on the bottom, they're on what's called a mummy roll. So flying fox babies are born with the innate knowledge that they need to hang on. Mum can't hold them. They hang on to her as she's flying, and can't let go, because they will die if they fall to the ground. So as soon as they're born, they know they need to hang on. So when we get them in as orphans, we need to give them something to hang on to. Otherwise, they get incredibly stressed. So they're called mummy rolls. They get wrapped against a pillow so that they can hang on to that. They're very funny creatures, because when they're in care as babies, they need to explore and they need to play. So we have them on little clotheslines with toys, and yeah, it's anyone who wants to be a bat carer, let me know. Just contact me. They're great to work with. Next slide. I'm just conscious of time. We get microbats. We've got a lot of microbats in the mountains. Dozens and dozens of species up here. There's over 100 across the country. Some of those species are threatened, and again, similar type climate change impacts for them. It's getting too hot. Again, less than 1% of them will have the Lyssa virus. Do not interact with them. If you get bitten or scratched by either a microbat or a flying fox, go straight to the doctor and tell them that's what happened. They will give you an inoculation against Australian bat Lyssa virus. Don't think, oh, it's just a scratch, it's fine. No, it's not. You need to go and get yourself to a doctor. So again, they will also get severely dehydrated with stress, and they're not carrying extra fluids. So the first thing we do with these guys when we rescue them is give them fluids by subcut method. They live in colonies and they are insectivores. These guys, you absolutely want these guys living in your yard if you can. One microbat, and they're only about this big, will eat 1,000 mosquitoes a night. So you absolutely want them hanging around your house. You can get microbat boxes to try and encourage them to come. Next slide. So the types of rescues for the microbats, the most common one is cat attack. They're little and they're flying around and looks like a toy, I guess, to a cat. Dehydration, and sometimes they get stuck in walls of houses and have difficulty getting out. Particularly if people didn't know that the microbats are in there and they're doing renovation work, and suddenly seal up the section that had the microbats in it. Okay, next slide. Wombats. Again, they've got climate change impacts. They know when to come out of their burrows at night because of change of temperatures that they can gauge from within the burrow. So changing climates and freakish weather patterns throw them out completely. There was research done in Queensland last year. They had issues with wombats that were starving to death because they didn't know it was time to come out of the burrow. They can get mange, and I'll talk about mange in a little while, and they are heavy. So they're about 45 kilos for an adult wombat. And I remember when I did the training, the trainer was, it's really easy. You just bend from the knees and you put your hands around the middle of it, head facing outwards, and lift. Which sounds very easy till you try and lift a 45 kilo animal that doesn't want to be lifted. So if you get an injured wombat, just call wires. Trust me, don't try and handle them. They're too heavy. They live in burrows and they stress badly in care. Next slide. So this is mange. The types of rescues we get are hit by cars and trucks, and mange. Mange is probably our most common. Sorry. So the two photos on the left-hand side are wombats with mange. It's incredibly painful. It's caused by mites, and it will just degenerate unless it's properly treated. So on the right, the photo on the right is a photo of what we call mange flaps that we put out the front of wombat burrows, and they've got little milk bottle lids in them with cydectin, which is a chemical that kills the mites. And so every time a wombat goes into or out of the burrow, it knocks the flap and that tips the cydectin onto the back, and that's how we treat them. That way they're taking the cydectin also into the burrows, so it kills the mites. We also can get quite a few dog attacked, but it's got to be a big dog. You're not going to get a chihuahua take on a wombat. And we do get orphans. Usually the orphans are from mums hit by cars. Next slide. So the babies are very cute, as are all babies. Top left, it's important to know that wombat pouches face backwards. So everybody knows how kangaroo pouches work, and possum pouches aren't that much different. The wombat pouch faces backwards because mum digs. So if it faced forwards, then you'd end up with dirt through the pouch as she's digging. So the wombat, if you find a dead wombat and you're looking for it in the pouch will be at the back end. Okay. Now, when they're in care, we put PVC pipes half into the ground and encourage them to start building tunnels. Again, we dehumanize these guys so that we don't want them to hang around humans and think they're pets. And we do soft releases from various carers' homes across the mountains and down in Mulgoa. Next slide. Brews and Wallabies are beautiful creatures. So again, same as the possums, residential encroachment. This is another species, another number of species who have found ways to live with humans, and it's helpful but also causes them problems. They are hunted. They are large and feisty. Some of them, the first time you go out for a rescue of an adult male eastern grey, it's quite an experience. And they have mob rule. So they live in groups. They're not solo animals. Next slide. The types of rescues, usually it's hit by a car, probably the most common. We have had some hunting ones that we've had to do. They can also get caught in barbed wire, and we get the orphans. That photo there is a photo taken by another WISE member who she named Soxy. That little guy was burnt in the 2019-2020 fires. He burnt his feet and his tail escaping from the fires. So he did well, and he was released back with a mob. Next slide. So the babies, we have specialized formula kangaroo milk. We do the weight monitoring. We have fake pouches. Again, we dehumanize them, and we buddy them up into groups so that they can be released as their own mob when they go out. Next slide. We also get the small mammals. So here we have a sugar glider, and then a feather tail glider, and then a little antechinus. Little and fast. Next slide. We also get, that's a pygmy possum, and we get a lot of bandicoots. Now, I do get complaints from members of the public that bandicoots are digging holes in people's yards. Don't think of it as digging holes. Just think of it as they're aerating your garden for you. There's not much we can do about bandicoots, and you can't relocate a native animal from where it is. Next slide. The other mammals we can get, that's a platypus that came from Winmalee Water Treatment Centre. We've got an echidna there that came from Blackheath. We also have some quolls, certainly the upper mountains, that have come into care. Next slide. Okay, good. So what can you do? If you click for me back, yep, plant natives in your garden. Okay, we keep cutting out habitat for these guys. If we can put some native food in the garden that they can eat, and then water. Okay, they need water as much as humans do, particularly as we're now coming into summer, whether it's little rock pools that you can put in or bowls. If you're putting bowls and stuff like that out of water, a couple of things, make sure you've got rocks or sticks in it for the small reptiles and the small little marsupials so they don't drown. They need to be able to get out of the water. The other thing is, if you can, try and put the water bowls into areas where there's some shade. There's nothing worse on a hot day than a hot drink of water. So if you try and keep it cool if you can, and put some in different areas where animals are going to be. So put some maybe up on a rock shelf if you've got that in your garden, some down on the ground. You might want to hang some from trees as well for the arboreal animals. You can also put in boxes. So I talked before about hollows and how that's the natural home for most of our native animals, and how we lose a lot of hollows when they cut down trees. So boxes are fake hollows. We've got sugar gliders in a glider box, and then we also have a bird nesting box. Always put them up in your trees, give homes to natives wherever you can in your garden. Know your locals, know what animals you've got in your area. They have patterns of behaviour, so you might see a possum that comes at 9 o'clock every night. If they don't come for a few nights, there may be a problem. Know what's happening with the wildlife in your suburb. Watch your domestic animals. I don't want to cause an argument, but the number one reason we get call outs for certainly ringtail possums is cats, domestic cats. And I regularly turn up to homes where people will say to me, oh yeah, that's the third one Fluffy's brought in this month. There's a pattern of behavior there. Even if you can keep them in at night, that would be really helpful. Think about the impact also on your domestics, because while a cat can take a ringtail, a cat is actually quite at risk of an adult male brushtail if cornered. So to protect your cat, I would keep it indoors at night. Just think about the impact that your domestic animals have on the wildlife. You can have a car kit. Now, I was going to do a joint presentation with Blue Arc for this. They're currently putting together car kits that they're going to sell to the community, trying to keep it under $30 so that people can have it in there ready to rescue animals as they need to if they see one by the side of the road. But some basic equipment you could have in your car is towels, a blanket, a pillowcase is great. If you put a pillowcase over your hand, grab a brush tail by the rump. Don't grab a brush tail by the tail, grab it by the rump. And then pull the pillowcase over, tie the pillowcase off. You can get it to a vet that way and it's not going to hurt you and it's not going to hurt the possum. And gloves. Gloves are always good to have, both normal plastic gloves and also maybe some welding gloves. Think about safety for you and safety for the animal. Do not rescue an animal if you're at all concerned or if it's going to place you or the animal in danger. You've got the wires number there, and the next slide has questions, but I don't know if we've got time for questions because we're at 1:15. Next slide has my contact details that people can contact me on.
If anyone does have some questions, feel free to ask them of Tracy. I'll be actually doing the next presentation. The presenters that were to do that presentation have become unavailable suddenly. So we do have time to ask Tracy questions if you wish. I'll just stop sharing the screen so that we then may go back to. Okay, so is there any questions from anybody for Tracy regarding wildlife? It's a very important part of living in the Blue Mountains. I'm actually an ex-wires carer myself from a past life, and I can't stress enough how important it is to follow the guidelines and things that Tracy's put forward there. Our wildlife's very precious and we need to look out for it. No questions? Okay. As far as the car kit and things like that go, we are also in connection with Blue Arc. So once these become available, we'll be publicising those on our webpage as well with the Get Ready information. Okay, we do have one here from Liz. How can we encourage our resident possum to live in the possum box we have?
Yep. Okay, a number of things. If you can, it sounds gross, but if you can collect any of its feces, add it to some water, shake it up and use a sprayer bottle and spray it on the possum box. It will then have its scent on it. And that may encourage it over. Or leave some food on top.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I don't ever seem to have issues with the possums taking up residence in mine. So, any other questions for Tracy? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending, Tracy. Sorry about our technical issues that we had, but we persevered and overcome. So thank you very much for showing resilience right here while we're doing our presentation. And thank you everyone else for attending. If you would like to jump into the next room, I will be doing a bit of a presentation on some of the citizen science projects that we can do to network and to also get out into the environment and help monitor and look after what we have in our backyard. Yeah, I'm hoping I can call on my previous life as a wildlife ecologist and answer any questions that are necessary in that, but we will be able to head those off to our education people once we go in. So thank you very much again, Tracy, and I will see everybody over in the next session.